Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
Often in life, people who don't like us will sugarcoat their words or try to downplay how much they just don't like us. We've all experienced this, and in a lot of ways it's refreshing when someone is just brutally honest with us when they tell us what they really think. And I have a story about that for you today. A group of priests was told recently exactly what their bishop thinks of them, and by extension, of us, traditionally minded Catholics everywhere. They told them in no uncertain terms what they think of those of us who are attached to the faith and all of its dynamic practices, the sacraments, and yes, its beautiful traditional Latin liturgy. They did so in no uncertain terms. And I'm going to expand this to show you that the bishops of the Francis wing of Francis Church don't particularly like the rest of us. In fact, they actually like heretics and schismatics more than the rest of us. And I'm going to illustrate this by their absolute betrayal of our forebears and a bizarre update on the Synod of Synodality. So let's get into this. Well, let's start in Slovenia, where Rorate Celi has the text of a letter from the bishops to the priests and faithful who want to keep the Latin Mass going. Their response to the faithful is truly remarkable. For some background, the laity requested a traditional Latin Mass be made available to them in their country back when Summorum Pontificum went into effect way back in 2007. According to that document, the laity have every right to have that Mass said regularly every day if the demand is there, and the bishop cannot really say no. Well, in many cases, like in Slovenia and the United States and everywhere else, the bishops don't care and illicitly rejected the request, limiting them to one single Latin Mass a month, and eventually kicking out the good priests who offered the sacraments and replacing him with a modernist who engaged in all kinds of liturgical abuse, including refusing to elevate the chalice during the consecration. That's not allowed, regardless of what form of the Mass you're saying. Finally, a lay apostolate comprised of a YouTube channel and a blog and probably in-person meetings got the laity to stop going to Mass with him and to go seek the sacraments elsewhere. This letter from Slovenia outlines the bishop's anger. It says some rather unflattering things about the laity and the lay apostolate in question. Now, for comparison purposes only, imagine if Dr. Taylor Marshall was the subject of a letter by the USCCB or the Texas Bishops' Conference that was then sent public, and they talked about him and his audience in really unflattering terms. It would make national and international headlines, and for good reason. The bishop's letter in the case of the Slovenian Catholics lays it all out. Then here's what they say about the lay apostolate, though. That lay apostolate is called ad dominum, which you'll see referenced here, and they are accused of inciting anger and animosity towards Francis, mocking Vatican II, and misrepresenting canon law and Traditionis Custodes. The bishops then accuse this lay apostolate of, quote, having an a priori rejection, distortion, and purposely misleading interpretation of the motu proprio, Traditionis Custodes, and disagreement with the papal commitment to ecclesiastical unity. Interpretations that make the motu proprio Traditionis Custodes seem to be the only partially binding, because it supposedly permits a distinction between a formal group of faithful and an informal group, i.e., individual requests for extraordinary occasions such as weddings, etc., which are, according to them, despite everything, still permitted. Sympathizers of the old rite, which they seek because of their tiredness and incomprehension of the post-conciliar liturgy. Yeah, that must be it. And individuals, mostly laymen, who want to take the place of bishops and make decisions about the liturgical discipline of the Church according to their own interests. Individuals who, for personal reasons, reject Pope Francis and make themselves leaders of a quote-unquote parallel church. End quote. While it's certainly true that some high-profile lay apostolate now respond to the crisis in the Church by offering what they call an alternative voice for the authentic magisterium of the Church, woo lad, most lay work for the faith would not be done in that way that is just plain tacky like that. And Ad Dominum and its affiliated websites are not engaging in that kind of rhetoric. The notion that traditional Catholics are setting up a parallel church is an accusation the modernists make, partially because many of us have, independently of one another, started to point out that what the modernists are doing is establishing their own parallel church, which some of us call the ape of the church, which comes from Catholic prophecy. The difference being that you cannot change the Catholic faith and remain Catholic. You just can't. The bishops in Slovenia are using here the rhetoric that we can and should expect some of the American bishops to start using, and soon if things continue. If I ever get accused of what ad dominum are being accused of doing, I'll let you know, but I suspect that the American bishops will be far savvier than to issue such a short-sighted letter. That letter and all my sources today can be found on my own site at returntotradition.org. That's the name of this podcast with a .org at the end. It's a good backup place to follow me when our hosts on YouTube inevitably stop sending you notifications about my latest uploads. But it's clear that the Slovenian bishops think traditional Catholics are schismatic. That is why they accuse the proprietors of ad dominum, of schism, essentially. That is what it means to set up a parallel church, to declare yourself an alternative voice for the authentic magisterium of the church. The bishops of Slovenia should just act and formally declare them as such, but of course they can't, because canonically, you can't be convicted of that in a fair canonical hearing, because setting up a parallel church is a rather specific thing to be doing that they aren't guilty of. But it's not only the Slovenian bishops. The real schismatics are the ones who operate many of the institutions of the church, including this so-called synod on synodality, where we have a story that our forebears would have found unbelievable, but by now is sadly predictable. Headline from the National Catholic Register: Vatican asks bishops to invite local Protestant and Orthodox leaders to participate in synodal path, offering some practical suggestions to ensure ecumenical dimension of the synodal journey. The cardinals encouraged bishops to reach out to leaders of other Christian communities in their area. Remember, this synod was supposed to help the church really embrace the spirit of the age and the spirit of Vatican II, and bring itself up to date. Again. And the way they're going to do that was to let the laity give input on various issues of the day, which promised to be full of heterodoxy and heresy, but then something odd happened. Journalists and commentators alike started to notice that most of the synodal meetings in dioceses had virtually zero lay attendance. In other cases, the laity were hand-selected to participate in the process, thus ensuring an outcome that was predetermined. A lot of that going around these last couple of years in the secular world, and now to see it in the church isn't that surprising. But let's see what this is really all about. From the article, quote, "The Vatican has issued a letter asking Catholic bishops to invite local Orthodox and Protestant leaders to participate in the diocesan stage of the 2-year process leading to the 2023 Synod on Synodality. Cardinal Mario Grace, the General Secretary of the Synod of Bishops, and Cardinal Kurt Koch, President of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, wrote a letter together asking Catholic dioceses to embrace the ecumenical dimension of the synodal process. The dialogue between Christians of different confessions, united by one baptism, is a special place in the synodal journey," said the letter published by the Vatican on January 17th. "Indeed, both synodality and ecumenism are processes of walking together, offering some practical suggestions to ensure the ecumenical dimension of the synodal journey. The cardinals encourage bishops to reach out to leaders of other Christian communities in their area. After identifying the main Christian communities present in the area, the bishops should prepare and send a letter to their leaders, or better visit them personally for this purpose," it said. The bishops should then invite local Christian leaders to send delegates to pre-synodal diocesan meetings and submit written reflections on the questionnaire included in the preparatory documents. National bishops' conferences are likewise asked to invite representatives from other Christian communities and national councils of churches to participate in the synodal process. End quote. In other words, they want the input from heretical schismatic groups to foster ecumenical dialogue, which the church categorically rejected until after the council. And dialogue for the purpose of what precisely? They're not going to call the schismatics to repentance, to give up their heresies and come home to Rome, so at best they're going to do what? Maybe coordinate neighborhood recycling programs and homeless sandwich ministry operations. This stuff is all very confusing to me because the salvation of souls is the highest law of the church, and when you have a process that is designed rather explicitly to remove the faithful away from such uncomfortable conversations, because many of the bishops do actually believe that "dare we hope all men are saved" nonsense, that they've reduced the church to a social services ministry, and one that will not ask uncomfortable questions of secular leaders who claim to be members of the church but act as servants of Satan in the world, almost as if they were living without grace or providence. And I say that only half jokingly because a listener sent this to me. It's a strange coincidence, to be sure. You're familiar with this image by now. For those not able to see what I have on display, it's the childish drawing of the Synod of Synodality logo with the dates of the Synod. That font, for those who can see, is called Providence Sans. Sans, meaning without. So, without providence. That's pretty amazing, and I don't think it's coincidental. This synod is going to be a disaster for the church, and it brings to mind one of the phrases said by Our Lady of La Salette, that Rome would lose the faith and become the seat of Antichrist. I've been asked to revisit Our Lady of La Salette in light of things in 2022, so let me know if you're interested in that. I have a follow-up to the name and title of Our Lady associated with Candlemas and the Feast of the Purification in the works, probably for that feast day, one of the biggest Marian apparitions out there, and everybody calls it by the wrong name. So it would be after that. But Our Lady of La Salette is said to have said those words, and is also said to have warned of 2 worm-ridden popes that would curse the church. Kind of makes you wonder a little bit. If you want proof about that font, I'll have a link to the place where it can be downloaded from an official diocesan website in my show notes, along with today's articles at returntotradition.org. It's the name of this podcast with the .org at the end. You'll find it in there in the show notes for this episode. Now, what did you think of all this? Am I off base for thinking that those that want the same faith as Catholics at any point in history are the ones considered bad and meanie and schismatic, while actual schismatics and heretics are more valued for their opinion on how to run the church than we are? Let me know in the comments, please, and like and subscribe if you haven't. It really does help. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.